We begin with breaking news. Republican Mike Gallagher announcing today he will not seek another term in Congress representing the state's 8th district. Good evening. Thanks for joining us. I'm Jason Zimmerman. That announcement comes after a controversial vote Gallagher took this week as one of only 3 Republicans in the U.S. House voting not to impeach Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas. Tonight, Gallagher says it's not the reason he's leaving Washington. New at 6 in a one-on-one interview, Gallagher addresses the decision and what's next. In a move catching many Republicans off guard, Congressman Mike Gallagher says he won't be seeking a 5th term, emphasizing it has nothing to do with his controversial impeachment vote this past week, angering many in his own party.
This is something my wife and I have been thinking about for a long time. I've been through tough votes before. The Mayorkas thing is nothing compared to, the Jan 6 stuff or some other votes I've taken. So that really wasn't a factor in it.
In explaining his vote, Gallagher also denies ever telling fellow Republicans or promising constituents he would vote to impeach, something that's been suggested on social media.
That's not true. I've never said I would vote to impeach Mayorkas. In fact, I whipped no for over a month to House leadership, and the fact that they barreled forward with a vote, I still don't understand that, because they knew I was a no. I was never undecided, and I've never told anyone I was going to vote to impeach Mayorkas.
Gallagher's decision leaves the race for the 8th congressional seat wide open in a district that's considered to lean Republican, and where Gallagher won with more than 62% of the vote in every general election since 2016. However, he was facing the prospect of a primary challenger this fall.
I wouldn't rule out running for something in the future. I mean, public service is always going to be part of my DNA.
This decision, Gallagher says, allows him to spend more time with his family, and he plans to stay in Northeast Wisconsin.
All I know is that tonight I'm going to have a beer or two with my wife and relax for a second and start to spend some more time with my family, and the rest will sort itself out.
Wisconsin Democrats issuing a statement in response today saying, quote, Speaker Johnson and the House GOP are mired in chaos and dysfunction, and Mike Gallagher calling it quits is about as stark an indictment of Republicans' inability to govern as you can get. Wisconsin Democrats look forward to competing in the 8th and bringing some stability and competence back to the House, end quote.